There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers, a dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends, a place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view, but when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Good evening. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Across the table from me, Mr. Tim Dennis. What a great first hour. That was very nice, very refreshing story about love that kind of transcends time and space and the afterlife. And again, I encourage everybody that's listening to pick up the book, Anita's Heaven, and you can check that out at ANITASHEAVEN.com, AnitasHeaven.com. And follow on the love story. That's just really warming and touching. And
there's only one question I had for him I didn't get to ask.
What was it?
When he crosses over and Benita crosses over, does he have to choose? I know you said that your grandfather once told you about that.
Right.
But and when he crosses over, will Benita try to get a hold of him?
That's interesting. We'll do a follow-up.
There you go.
We'll see what else we can get. That is some good questions. See, you got to jump in here a little bit more readily, Mr. Dennis. The questions after the fact will not help us. So if, Anita, you're listening and you want to go ahead and use Tim during the interview to type these messages, then feel free to do that and pass it on to him. Let him know. Right now, though, we're going to go to our next guest in a second here. I do want to mention, though, that coming up, we have got the event that's taking place at Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky. It's taking place July 27th through the 30th, and it is going to be great. Join us out there if you get a chance. A lot of fun. It's going to be a really nice small gathering, only 100 people at the event, and you get two different packages to choose from. For $360, you can spend the entire time with us and 2 full nights of investigation at Waverly Hills, or you can just do a smaller bite-sized portion, if you will. You can come to the Sunday night meet and greet and autograph session and hang out and meet everybody, and then you can choose either Monday and Monday night's investigation or Tuesday and Tuesday night's investigation and be a part of it that way. I also want to mention to people, coming up at the end of August, the end of September, rather, is the Louisville Mid-South Paranormal Convention that will be taking place with our good friend Keith Age, who is the host of, as you know, is the host of the TV show Spooked, which also did Children of the Grave on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's been a very popular series. So he's going to be out there. He's got a great guest lineup that'll be joining him out there for the talk. We've got author Bill Bean, who survived a very intense haunting in his home. He'll be doing a talk out there for the event. We also have, and the name of his book is Dark Force. They've got Archbishop James Long will be out there talking about demonology. I'll be out there doing a talk on paranormal investigations. Ghost Hunters International star and Ghost Hunters star Donna LaCroix will be joining. Jason Gowan, who is also on Encounters Radio, will be out there. Keith and Sandra Johnson from Ghost Hunters and NEAR, N-E-A-R, which I believe is a New England Anomalies Research Group. They've been seen. Keith is the demonologist. He and his wife work in the paranormal field. They'll be out there. So you're going to want to check that out. Of course, Keith Age, who hosts the event, will be there. Our good friend Patrick Burns from the television show Haunting Evidence. Rick Hayes from Life's Gift will be out there. A lot of great speakers. Robert Honeycutt as well. And Ryan Buell, Tim Yancey from Encounters. Ryan Buell, of course, from Paranormal State. So go check out. You can get all the information by going to LouisvilleGHS.com. Very affordable tickets for an entire weekend of a lot of fun. Again, go to LouisvilleGHS.com. Our second guest up for this evening, we're going to go into more after-death communication. And another interesting story, our guest is Nick Roy. And Nick has been investigating and looking into this phenomena of after-death communication for quite some time. So welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town, our guest, Mr. Nick Roy. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Tim.
Thank you very much for spending some time with us here.
Pleasure's mine.
Let me let's get right to this. What was your incentive to begin trying to communicate with the other side and understand after-death communication?
Well, the whole thing started, of course, with the death of my brother. We were very close, and he contracted lung cancer. And he had a very hard death, pain, etc., that lasted for 6 months. And I turned around one day when it was all over, and I was in a, I guess, part state of depression because I missed him so much. I'm out on the lawn cutting the grass, and I just happened to say, Vince, I hope that what they say is true, that whenever you die, that you go into another dimension, another world, that you're okay, and if I knew that you were all right, that's all that I'm concerned about. And I left a drop at that. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in my TV room with my wife. We're watching a program. The telephone rings, and it's my brother. And he says, Nick, it's okay. And the line went dead. Now, I immediately dialed *69 because that gives me the incoming number, and all I got was a buzz. That started it. I became so interested in the subject that I started collecting every piece of data that I could. And at the present time, I have well over $1,000 invested in books, and I just measured the amount of material I've collected, and it's 18 inches high from reports from all over the world. I get them from Germany, from Australia, from Canada, from Britain, all about people, quote unquote, that have had some type of after-death communication. Then I met an individual by the name of William Guggenheim, and Bill wrote the book Hello from Heaven, and he and I corresponded back and forth a little bit, and then I asked him if he would care to come to our area and give a talk. And the reason I could do this is I was teaching at that time, after I retired from the Justice Department, I was teaching down at the community college a safety course. And the course had come to an end, and the head of the department said, do you have any other courses or any other subjects you'd like to teach? And I told her about this, and I said, do you think that really the school will approve it? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, why don't you set up the program and we'll schedule it? Well, I did, and that's when I had the opportunity then, had the class, etc., and the material, and I thought I would ask Bill if he would come and talk to the class or give a seminar. Well, he said, how about a seminar, because I'll be in Ohio, and I'll just shoot up from Ohio to Greensburg or Youngwood, and we'll give the talk. Over 500 people attended that seminar.
Wow.
So there's a lot of interest in the after-death communications, more than people realize, but most of the time they don't want to talk about it because they are afraid that they'll be criticized or people will think that there's something mentally wrong with them.
You know, what's really interesting to me, if I can, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Sure,
here,
no.
But, we all have stories of what got us involved in the paranormal. And I can tell you one thing that I've thought is really interesting here with your story. My family, our first real bang into the paranormal is the fact that after my grandmother passed away, dealing with cirrhosis, she communicated not only with me as a child, where she made an appearance and came back and read to me and was there for me. I was able to describe her to a T to my mom, who then related the information to my aunt and my grandfather. And, only my aunt and grandfather knew what my grandmother had been buried in, and I guess I described to a T her burial outfit. But within weeks of my grandmother's death, my aunt received a series of phone calls from my grandmother.
Well, telephone calls are, believe it or not, are one of the major methods of contact, and people just don't realize that. But I think it's the classes I had. I mean, the experiences are unbelievable. I can give numerous accounts if you're interested in it. I'll tell you what happened to some of these things, but they're absolutely amazing, and these people have kept them hidden because they're afraid. In fact, one young lady who lost a son told her husband about it. He said, you have to go to a psychiatrist. You're cracking up. And it wasn't so. Everybody's being contacted by those that have passed over that they love, and they just don't realize it. They don't know what to look for. You can get it by telephone, you can get it by TV, you can get it by computer. Lights go on and off. There's odors, there's shadows. If you're writing a check or you're doing something in the evening, and all of a sudden you think you see a shadow going by you, that's a contact. There are animals. They're great. Birds, butterflies, flowers out of season, articles found, articles disappearing, thoughts received, feelings, temperature changes, sightings. You get all type of things. Pinching. Some people get pinched. Other people turn around and feel like wind blowing. Some people say, I've been walking and I feel like there's spider webs. I'm running into spider webs. That's contact. What they have to do is learn after they receive the contact how to extend it, how to go further, how to let the other person know that has found the portal to cross back over from the other dimension, how to continue the contact. That's the big thing. So it's amazing. It's a wonderful thing, and this has been going on for well over 2,000 years.
So you say that these connections happen a lot more readily than people recognize. What are some things concrete that people can start to watch for? I know you were saying like shadows out of the corner of your eyes.
I'll tell you one that I have with my brother. Okay, I mean, even after he doesn't contacted me by actual voice anymore. I was just at that one time, but every once in a while the light will go off on me. Okay, now I've been quote unquote. I've been working in, for example, in my kitchen. I've been doing some paperwork or something like that. I'll turn the light off and walk into the other room. Okay, I turn around and come back in for something. The light's on. Okay, I turn it off, and maybe a half hour later, the light will go back on. I had an electrician look at it, and he says, "There's nothing wrong with this thing, nothing wrong with the switch." But that's a method of contacting. They can all. You can get a electronic voice contact. Get yourself a whatchamacallit recorder, and at nighttime when things are quiet, etc., make your pitch to the individual that may be there by saying, I'm here, I've got a recorder on, please contact me or give me some message you're here. And then, quote, turn the recorder on and be quiet. Just let it run. And about a half hour later, you turn it off and you rerun it. Now, you'll never hear anything, but you'll pick it up on the recorder.
Right.
The recorder will bounce the information back. And I've had that happen to me one time. And the individual said his name was George. I don't know any George, but by the same token, whoever was here left his name as George. You can get contacts from your animals. Now that's anybody that has an animal that has passed over. They think that the animal is gone. Not so. That animal can contact you just as much as an individual can. So it's it's an interesting thing to get involved in. Me, I'm just sold on this thing completely. I mean, I'm not a person, quote, after all my, as you know, experience in law enforcement and everything, I'm not a person that's easily convinced of something.
Right. Well, give us some of your background as well. Tell us a little bit about what you did in your life so people know you're not just some crackpot guy sitting in his mom's basement that's come up with all these crazy theories.
Listen, I can understand that. Okay, that's not a problem. I can understand that. Well, first place, I'm 79 years old, okay? This really all started when I was just a kid, okay? My grandmother was a, quote-unquote, was what we call a sensitive. Okay, and she was from the old country, but also a school teacher. And when she moved over here, I would sit for hours sometimes on the floor, and while she wound material for. She did a lot of knitting, and I would hold the material in my hands, and she made a ball out of it. And she'd talk to me and tell me things. Well, when she passed over, their house was next to ours, and my mother would turn around and say, "Look, why don't you go over and check and make sure everything's okay over there?" And I said, "Fine, I'd do that." So this one day I went over and I come through the house, and everything seemed fine, and I walked upstairs and everything was fine, and I passed her room, and I said, "Geez, I'll miss her." And I walked in the room, and I said, "Grandma," I said, "really miss you." Now she had a rocking chair near a window, okay, is where she used to sit. and that chair started to move.
Oh.
Okay? I mean, that was all I needed. I went out of there. Okay? And I told my mother, I said, I'm not going back there. Okay? That was the first encounter I had, okay, with what you would call abnormal. Okay? And I was really concerned about that. Well, years went on, and I got out of school, etc., joined the National Guard. We became federalized in 50. I joined in 48 or 49. Sent to Germany, then to Korea, and had an incident over there. I was in an aid station. I was a medic, and they brought in a young boy, okay, that just lost, quote unquote, hit a landmine, just took off his arm and his leg. Okay, he was laying in a stretcher, and as they brought him in, and there was blood all over the place, and he looked up at me, and I just shook my head, and I looked at the surgeon, and he shook his head. He said, well, we'll do the best we can. Okay, and he set him down, and I went over to change the bandage, and he looked up at me, and he said, tell the doctor everything's going to be okay. And I says, what? He says, tell the doctor not to worry. He says, I just saw my grandfather. And he says, everything's okay. And he passed away. Okay? I mean, that really shook me up.
Right.
Well, I came back home, okay, and I started into college, and then I had a friend of mine who was with the Justice Department of the state of Pennsylvania, and he said, look, he said, we need some people. He said that in the department, he said, you've had a lot of experience in medicine and stuff like that. He says, why don't you come with us? And I said, what do I do? He said, well, we're going to put you into the narcotic division. And he said, you'll work the streets for a while. And he says, and then he said, we'll see, how you come along. And I said, fine. I said, that sounds interesting. So I did, and I ended up being a supervisor for what they call a diversion investigation unit. And that is, we investigate their doctors, hospitals, wholesalers, etc. Anybody who had a registration from the federal government for a Schedule II drug, and that's narcotics, basically. And that's what I used to do. I had an office in Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh, and had 7 agents in my office, which I managed and assigned cases to. And there was only 2 DI units in the United States. One was in Texas, and one was here in the state of Pennsylvania. We, quote unquote, came in second. Okay, of course, how could you lose, right? We came in second with the diversion investigation unit, but we also, quote unquote, had 99% of convictions in court. Okay, and we arrested something over 37 doctors, not counting clinics and wholesalers who were diverting drugs. So after 25 years in that, I retired, and in 1990, I turned around and opened up a private investigation office, and I did that for 7 years. So I was in the whole gamut back in one way or another in law enforcement. And then it just got to the point that I thought enough is enough, and that's then when my brother had died in 80, and I said, I'm going to spend all the rest of my time investigating this this phenomena. And that's what I've been doing. I've been doing it since 1980,
well,
I still do it.
I want to take a quick break here, Nick, for our first break for the hour, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the story you told me about your brother in the hospital, because I think this is something that my co-host Tim has had happen with a family member as well. But
you're talking about my father and my aunt. Yeah,
we'll talk about that. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, Mr. Nick Roy.
We thought El Chupacabra meant the cup of coffee in Spanish.
Me llamo Hr.2 Especial. ¿Cómo está el yay?
What you talking about, Willis?
Shows you what we know. Stay tuned. There's more to come from the Darkness on the Edge of Town. The smell of voodoo hangs in the air. Either that or Dave and Tim had the 7-bean salad for dinner.
Don't nobody go in the bathroom for about 45 minutes. Somebody open the window.
Welcome back to the Darkness, or whatever is hanging in the air on the Edge of Town.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio, and we appreciate you spending your Sunday nights here with us. Got some exciting news, Mr. Dennis.
Yes.
Joining us on the air for the first time at Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio show on June 22nd. Make sure that everybody out there listening puts this down on their calendars. Live on the air, James Vanderbeek from Dawson's Creek. No, James Von Prague is going to be joining us on the show.
Holy.
We're going to be spending at least 1 hour. We're seeing if we can get him for the full 2-hour show. So you're going to want to check out that. It's going to be great. Next weekend, Father's Day weekend, we have got the lovely Tiffany Johnson, psychic medium, who's going to be on the premiere episode of Psychic Kids on A&E. And for hour 2, we're going to be interviewing Chip Coffey. Brand new show, so make sure you tune in for that. It's going to be a great one. 2 of our dear friends, and it's going to be an interesting little interview. The following week, again, like I said, the 22nd, we are going to be joined by Mr. James Von Prague. And on the 29th, we have got a really very interesting show for you. First of all, our good friend Wayne Herschel out of South Africa is going to be back on the show with us. And we're going to be talking about some new star maps and things that have been found and located. And actually, Dan Brown, I guess, might be using some of this in his new books.
Really?
Yeah, which, he wrote the book Angels and Demons, The Da Vinci Code, and he's working on a new book. But Wayne has got some very interesting information. I think 4 new star maps have surfaced that he's going to point out and show us that have correlation to some amazing findings. So he's going to be joining us live that night from South Africa. We're also going to be talking to Alex Monty Kanawati, who is a director and filmmaker, and is working on a movie called Return to Babylon, which are small silent movie vignettes about some of the silent movie stars. Excuse me. Sorry about that little coughing jag here. And his story of just how he made this film is amazing enough. And he's got some big names, including Tippi Hedren in this, a couple other big actors and actresses that are a part of this. The spooky stuff is the stuff that he's getting on film, Tim, that is not special effects. It's been sent out to special effects laboratories to look at, film laboratories. They don't know what's going on, but they're getting what they call morphing. And the images we're going to have up on our site soon are uncanny. There's one scene where the actor, as they're showing, you can't see it because it's moving at 24 frames per second to the naked eye, but as they're doing their dailies and they're running through the film, they would notice these strange frames. This one gentleman's hands seem to morph into what look like almost werewolves' hands. Strange, creepy faces keep appearing in the background. There's one character that looks like Nosferatu. I mean, it is unbelievable, the film footage, and the experts are baffled by what's going on. So we're going to have Alex on the show talking to us about that as well that night. So we've got a great month of June coming up for you.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got some fantastic stuff, including in the month of July, we're going to be doing past life regressions. Bobby Sullivan and Tiffany Johnson are going to do past life regressions on Tim and I, and we're going to do past life regressions, find out what we were, what happened to us, and we're going to be talking about that on the air, finding out a little bit more about past life regression as well. So you want to keep checking that out. We're going to go back into tonight's show.
One more note.
Yes, Tim.
We got to say a happy belated birthday to Wayne Herschel.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, his birthday was the 4th.
The 4th. Well, happy birthday to Wayne Herschel. Sorry we missed you on that. Missed you?
Thank you.
Sorry, missed you out there on your birthday or something. We're going to go back into our guest right now, Mr. Nick Roy. We're talking about after-death communication. And, Nick, before the commercial, I was alluding to the fact you've got an interesting story. When your brother, who was dying of cancer, was in the hospital, go ahead and tell us that story, too. That was pretty intriguing for me.
Yeah, I stopped in every night after work, and to see how he was going, if he needed anything, etc. And this one evening I walked in, and he said, "Boy, am I glad to see you." And I said, "Well, sure, what can I do for you? What do you need?" He said, "I don't need anything." He said, "But Dad was just here." And I said, "What?" He says, "Dad was just here." I says, "Vince, Dad died 5 years ago." He says, "I know, Nick." He says, "But he was here." I said, "Well, what happened?" He says, "I don't know." He says, "I was looking out the window," and he says, "and I heard something," and he says, "and I turned around," and he says, "There he is standing," he said, "at the end of the bed." And I said, "My God," he says, and he says, I looked at him, I said, "Dad." And he turned around, and he said, all he did was look at me, smile, and walked away. And I said, "Oh boy!" Now I go home and I tell my wife. I said, "I think the drugs are getting to him or something. I said, this is really getting weird. So about maybe 2-3 days later, I go back into the hospital when the second incident occurred, and I walked in, and he said, I hate to tell you this, but Aunt Min was here. And I said, Aunt Min? He says, yeah. I said, my God, Vince. He says, she was right here. I said, what did she want? He says, she looked at me and she said, oh, cancer, not another one. And disappeared. And Aunt Min died, my God, 20 years ago before that, okay? She had been dead for years. But this is another incident, okay, where the dead, or what we call the dead, were those who, I don't call them dead, those who have passed over,
right,
okay, are coming back. And people better understand that nobody is gone forever. They are gone from this dimension to another one. That's all it amounts to, okay? And many of them have found portals or dimensional highways, areas to come back. And if you ask them to come back, if you talk to them, it'll happen. But you have to be alert. You have to be waiting for it, okay? And the worst thing you can do when somebody passes over is to mourn for them, okay? They tell you don't do that because it's harder for them to come across. But it's an amazing thing.
Why does it make it harder for them to come across?
I have no idea. But the whatchamacallit, the individual that gave me that account, where they had the account of being told that, said that they said to her, if you wouldn't cry so much and make such a big deal out of me passing over, it causes, I guess it's the interference, the electronic interference. We're nothing but machines or pieces of electricity is all we really are. And apparently this sets up some type of a negative barrier for them, and it's harder for them to cross over. So I don't know what it does, but they said don't do that. Okay?
Well, let me have Tim share, too, just for the listeners and for your sake, to hear this kind of parallel. He had an interesting story regarding, it was your grandfather, right, Tim?
Right, yeah. My grandfather was passing away at the time from brain cancer at the age of 92. And similar to what you say, Nick, he saw, I was sitting with him, he had real bad pneumonia at the end, really congested. And one of the things I had learned from Dave's mom, who's a nurse, was to kind of cup your hand and hit him on the back to try and loosen some of that up. So I was trying to give him a little bit of relief, even though he wasn't getting much. And we were talking a little bit, and he laid back down because he said, well, that's about enough, I feel better. And he laid back down, and at that particular point, he had saw a woman with dark black hair and what he described as like a long flowing robe, or a dress, and ruby red lips, who came to the edge of his bed and was just smiling at him. Now, at this point, I was a little freaked out because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking he's looking into the living room and smiling at my mom and my sister. But he's not. He was staring clearly what looked like up at the ceiling. So I said, I'm thinking at this point, well, I'll humor him. I said, well, what's she saying, Grandpa? And he just smiled, and he said, she just smiled and said, I'll see you really soon. And part of this, too, which kind of gave it validation, was the family dog walks in as he's looking up at the ceiling, looks at me, kind of cocks his head, sits right to the left of me. My grandfather's on my right. And he looks up at the exact same spot with his head kind of cocked like, oh, who are you? So I understand what you're saying there. And I guess as a follow-up to what you were going through with your brother, did you realize at that time when he started seeing your dad and your aunt that maybe he was slipping away? No. That's the doggone part about it. Okay, I really could attribute it all to the drugs they were giving him. Okay, I said, oh, well, that's the Percodan, that's the narcotics they're giving him. That's what's causing it. And it's not. I mean, what a nut I was at that time if I had only realized what was going on. Okay, I think I could have explored it further. I could have gone further with it. And I am so serious about this. I don't. Did you people ever see the Blues Brothers?
Right.
They made a statement there which I steal, and that is, I'm on a mission.
Right.
Okay. I really am. I've got to get people to believe, okay, that this is really occurring. Your loved ones does not die. They can come and help you, for goodness sakes. If you have a problem, they can cross over and help you. My brother, okay, was dearly in love with my daughter. Okay, when she came into the world, he said the greatest thing ever happened to him. So he could hold her because they couldn't have children. He could hold her and he could take her places and things like that. Well, when she passed on, okay, she's now quote unquote a dietitian, etc. She lives in Meadville, but she was going to Indiana University to pick up her master's degree. And on the way down, which is Route 80, she would pray to my brother, okay, and say, Vince, take care of me, please, because I'm on the way to school, because it was about 120 miles, okay, and it was always in the evening. This one night, she comes down the highway, okay, and she says, Dad, I'm not kidding you. She says, I'm doing 75 because I'm getting close to being late. And she says, I'm pushing it. And she says, and I'm coming down the highway, and I come to an area where, quote unquote, there's a crossroads, and she says, and there's a car coming out of the crossroads, and, quote, he's not stopping. And she said, oh, my God. Okay? Now, what happened is amazing. There was a guy on the front porch of the house at the crossroads that saw all this. And he turned, when this is all over, he turned around, I was talking to my daughter, he says, when I saw this, I says, oh, there's going to be one big smash up. And he says, I ran to the door and hollered to my wife, call the ambulances. He said, we are in for one big smash up here. He said, I don't know, young lady. He says, how you missed him and how he missed you.
Wow.
But she ended up in his front yard. Okay? Not a scratch on her. Okay? He says, there is absolutely no explanation for this. He says, I don't know how it's possible that either one of you didn't hit. Now, she gets to the school. She turns around and goes into the class. When she comes out, she noticed that the right front tire is flat. Okay, so she has a credit card. She calls a local garage. They come out there, and she says, will you fix that flat for me? And he looks at the tire, and he says, yeah, we'll take care of it. He says, he says, I've got an extra tire. He says, I brought one. He said, we'll take care of it now. So he jacks up and everything, takes the tire off, and he said, lady, he says, what do you mean, fix it? And she says, what do you mean? He says, there's no way I can fix this tire. And she said, why? He said, well, take a look at it. He says, you got a hole in this tire. He says, the size of a dime. He says, there's no possible way. He says, how could you get a hole like that in this tire? He says, you've been running flat. He says, for how long? And she says, well, I've never noticed it. He said, well, I don't know how you got here. Now, there's two incidences that occurred with her brother. Okay, and she credits the whole thing to her brother, or my brother. Okay, to her uncle, and she says, "My God, Dad," she says, "it wasn't for Uncle Vince." She said, "I'd been dead." All I can tell everybody is, quote unquote, this has been going on for thousands of years. Plato agrees to this. Socrates agreed to this. Aristotle agreed to this. Whatchamacallit, we have Arthur Conan Doyle agrees to this. Dr. Raymond Moody has said the same thing. Gene Dixon, Pope Lambertini, okay, Horace Greeley, James Fenimore Cooper. It goes on and on and on. People that have had these experiences. It's not something that just came about. They have got to understand it occurs, and it's not quote unquote death. All it is a transformation. That's all it amounts to. You're being quote unquote just moved from one area to another. In my opinion, death here, physical death, is nothing but opening up a door to the greatest adventure you can possibly go into.
Yeah, that's interesting. When we're talking about the communication and the near-death points when people are talking to other spirits or whatever else might be in the room, I'm reminded of the story of the death of comedian Sam Kinison. Do you know that story at all?
No, I don't know that one.
Sam Kinison was a very loud, obnoxious comedian in the early 1990s. I think it was late 80s, early 90s. And on April 10th in 1992, Sam Kinison was on his way to Laughlin, Nevada to perform at a sold-out concert. He had just been married about the week before to a 20-year-old woman named Malika. And they were driving on the way from Los Angeles to Laughlin, and they were traveling, I think it was east. Anyway, they were traveling out there, and Sam was sober, which is a big deal for him because he had been fighting the drugs and alcohol. He hadn't had a drink or drugs in months, and which was a huge issue for him at the point. It was about 8:30 at night. They were on their way to the show, and Sam saw a pickup truck coming from the other direction, and he slowed down his car to 15 miles per hour. At the time, it hit the Trans Am head on. The truck slammed right into him. 2 kids were in the pickup, which was littered with beer cans, and apparently, I guess after hitting Sam, the driver was overheard by the other people saying, "God, look at my truck," not worrying about what he had done. But Sam Kinison wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He hit the windshield with his head. Some passersby called for emergency services and tried giving Sam CPR with no success. But immediately after the crash, they said Sam looked very normal. He looked like he was going to be perfectly fine. He walked out into the middle of the highway, though, then looked up at the sky and started to say, no, I don't want to die, but I don't want to die. And then it seemed like he was having a conversation with somebody or something in the sky, and he said, "But why?" Okay. And then he laid down and died. And this was in front of a group of people. I think there was like about 5 or 6 witnesses that saw this take place. So, you know what I mean? It's interesting to hear these stories where at the moment of death, it does seem like there's some peace and definitely some people that come, or energy that comes to help you and make you understand that it is just a transformation to the next level.
There's a fellow that lives only about 20 miles away from me. He was at the class. Mm-hmm. And he turns around every year. He goes someplace different fishing. He's a great fisherman, loves to go fishing. So there's a place out in Arkansas that he heard about, and he said he wanted to go. So he got all the arrangements. He got on a plane. He got to wherever he was going to go, rented a car, and headed to wherever this lake was. He's coming down the road. He says it was was about 150 yards where he was to make a turn to the right. Okay, and it was crossroads. Okay, so he came down and he noticed the stop sign, and he started slowing down. He looked through the rearview mirror, and he sees his car coming behind him. And he says, "There's no way this guy's going to stop." He says, "This guy's on the horn." He says, and he spins around him and through the crossroads. Well, guess what? From the crossroads came, quote unquote, an 18-wheeler, and they connected. Okay, big smash up over the bank, down the hill, and he's sitting there, saw the whole thing, and he says, "You talk about being scared." And he says, "I'm sitting there, and I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, somebody's knocking on the window of my car." And I looked over, and he says, out the side window, and he says, "There's a state cop." And he says, "Guy is immaculately dressed." He says, about 6 feet. He says, red hair. Told me to roll down the window. I rolled the window down, and he says, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." He said, "Boy," he says, "that was a heck of a smash-up." He says, "What should we do?" And the officer said, "Well, there's nothing we can do." He says, "They're both dead." He said, "But I'll tell you what," he says, "you can make your turn here." And he says, "It's about 45 minutes from here to the motel where you're going to stay. That's where the lake is." He says, "Be careful. Have a nice day." So he says, he rolled the window up, turns around, makes the turn. He said, "I don't go any more than about 25, 50 yards." And I said, "Wait a minute. I better give him my name and address and stuff, because I'm sure he'll want to ask me to testify against something." He says he stops the car, gets out. There's nobody there. There's no cop there. He said, "But there's cars pulling up." And he says, "And I saw one guy already on a cell phone pointing down over the hill." So he said, "I knew that there was somebody's calling for help." And he said, he said, "It is strange. I never thought any more about it. Go to the motel." He says, "I check in, everything else. I have dinner. Then after dinner," he says, "something starts to hit me. What the heck's going on here?" He says, "I go into the bar." He says, "I better get a drink." Goes into the bar, sits down, orders a drink. The bartender says, "You don't look too good." And he says, "No, I don't feel good." And he says, "Well, what happened?" He says, "You sick?" No. So he explains the whole story. And the bartender looks at him and smiles. And he says, what's the matter? He said, well, wasn't there anything suspicious? He says, yeah, that's why I'm here. He said, I couldn't figure out how that cop knew where I wanted to go. And he said, and how long it would take me to get here. And he says, that cop's dead. Mm-hmm. He said he was killed in a major accident 5 years ago. Wow. He says, this happens, he says, every time there is, quote, unquote, a tragic accident at that crossroads. He said, I have heard of 3 times at this bar. He says, the guy that owns this place has heard it more than that. Mm. He said, we don't know anything outside the cop, quote, unquote, shows up, okay, tells everybody, you okay, whatever, where they're supposed to go, and then disappears. So, I mean, there are strange things. Hank is in my class. So I have enough time?
Yeah, we're going to take our second break here. When we come back, we'll have about 10, 12 minutes to wrap up.
I want to tell you about a Hank at whatchamacallit, at Normandy, the invasion at Normandy.
All right, great. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show with our guest, Nick Roy.
Are UFOs real? Does Bigfoot exist? Was Emily Rose really possessed? Who is the next American Idol?
She bangs, oh baby, when she moves,
Thank you.
We try to answer these questions and more each week on The Darkness on the Edge of Town. Try not to fall asleep. We'll only give you nightmares. Welcome back to The Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Welcome back to the show. You're listening to Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Our discussions this evening have revolved around after death or afterlife communication, I guess, as well. Huh? Mm-hmm. And our first guest was Norman Ober with Anita's Heaven. Our second guest here is Nick Roy. And Nick, do you have a website or place people can find more information or communicate with you?
I'll tell you what I'd like. If people would like to contact me to ask questions, I'd be more than happy to do that. They can contact me with my email, okay? I don't have a website. My email, I think you have it, mroy755319 at AOL.com. And all they have to do is say ADC question. That's all, and I'll answer any questions they ask. I'll try to give them as much information. I'll tell them where to search for things, etc. No cost, no donations, nothing. Okay, I'm just on a mission, and I want to help.
Okay. Now, go ahead and tell us your other story here. We have about 10 minutes left.
Good. I can do 2 quick ones. One is by the name of Louise. She contacted me after the class was over, and she says, I'd like to tell you something that happened to me. And I said, what's that? She said, my grandfather and I were very close. And she says, he died here about 2 years ago. And she says, last year, she says, I'm sitting on the back porch in our home with my mother. And she says, and I got teary-eyed, and she says, I started to cry. It was my birthday. And I said, Mom, I miss Granddad so bad. And she says, well, he's with you. She says, I know. She says, but I really do. She says, every birthday he used to bring me something blue. And she says, it wasn't the gift. She says, I was always curious as to what he could find different in blue. And she says, and I'm going to miss that. She says that one of the main things that he used to do is he'd go out of his way to find something blue for me. And she says, and I miss that contact and everything else. So they're sitting there talking, and her mother said, by the way, she said, your grandfather just came. And she says, what do you mean? And she says, look on the banister. And there was a bluebird.
Oh, wow.
Okay. It stayed there, she said, for at least 5 minutes. She says, and then flew away. She says, he was there. He brought me something blue. Now, that was that story. The other one's Hank, who was, quote-unquote, in the Second World War, and he was on the Normandy invasion. And he said, this is the strangest thing that ever happened to me. He says, we hit the beach. He says, we're off the landing craft, and up we go off the beach, heading toward the cliffs. And he said, and there were ricochets everywhere, 50 caliber bouncing off of the barriers. He says, mortars going off. He said, landmines and everything else. He says, all of a sudden, he says, there was an explosion. He says, I was in the air and down in the mud. And he says, I'm laying there trying to figure out whether I'm alive or whether I'm dead. And he says, all of a sudden, he says, somebody grabs me by the back of my neck, pack, and picks me up, and he says, come on, this is not your day to die. Follow me. He says, you got to get off the beach. So he says, I followed him. And he says, then he says, I ended up underneath a little cliff, and he says, where 6 other fellows from different outfits were staying. And he says, and I dropped to my knees. He says, I'm exhausted. I'm sucking air. He says, as fast as I can get. And they both, all of them looked at me and said, man, they said, we had bets on you not making it. And he says, what do you mean? He says, we saw you zigzagging through there. He says, there's no way. He said, we're putting money on it. He says, how you got here? He says, I don't know. He said, well, I got here because of the sergeant. He says, he's the one who got me. He said, my platoon sergeant, he says, picked me up and brought me here. He says, where is he? He says, I got to thank him. And they said, what are you talking about? He said, there was nobody with you. And he said, what do you mean? He said, I followed him the whole way. He said, he told me, follow me. And he said, and that's what I did. He said, well, he said, we don't know what you did, who you were following. He says, but there's no question there was nobody there. And he says, and then the things broke up and everybody started moving out. He says, we got off of the beach. He says, and we're heading down the road. We stopped, he says, to get a rest. He said, and some of my gang that was in my platoon caught up with us. And he said, and I turned around and told him, he says, I got to know where the sergeant is. He says, my God, he saved my life. And they looked at me and they said, what are you talking about? He says, Sarge, he picked me up and saved me. And he says, hey, Hank. He said, he was one of the first guys that got it getting off the landing craft. He said he was floating in the water when we got off.
Wow.
He said, he's gone. He said, you have no idea what that did to me. He said, about a month later, he says, I'm on night guard duty. He says, I'm in a foxhole. He says, if you want to call it a foxhole. And he says, and out of the area, he says, that I was watching out of like a wooded area, he says, I see this guy coming. And he says, I couldn't figure what the heck's going on. He said, but he's walking toward me. He said, he wasn't in a combat outfit or anything. He says, he was in a uniform. And I thought, boy, that's weird. And he says, the closer it got, he says, it's the sergeant. And he says, my God, he says, Sarge, I can't believe this. And he looked at me and he said, I'm fine. He said, when you go home, please tell my family what happened. Tell them don't cry, I'm fine. And disappeared. I said, did you do that? He says, I did it. He said, I'll tell you, Mr. Roy, he says, I have never, quote, unquote, had a good night's sleep ever since. He says, you have no idea how that's bothered me. He says, I actually saw him. And he says, and he saved my life. He says, I know, I'll tell you, he says, I can't wait to cross over. I got to thank the guy. Okay, but those are two amazing stories I had. I mean, what I'd like to do is just send you and Tim a copy of all of some of the things that I collected in my class. It's amazing, some of the stories there.
Well, we'd love to talk to you again in the future and have you share more stories with us as well. We have about 3 minutes left. What would you like people to take away from this and from your experience so that they can go forth?
Tell them this, that there's more going on than they can possibly understand. All they have to do is open their minds. Don't be afraid, okay, of believing something that everybody's telling you can't happen. It can happen. It has happened, okay? Those that you love are only an arm's length away. That's all. And if you, quote unquote, will talk to them, if you will give them confidence that you understand that they are there and that they can help you, it will happen. That is the main thing. They have to believe. That's the biggest thing.
Well, Mr. Roy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the time that you've spent with us this evening and sharing the stories of hope and understanding of communication. I wish you continued success, and I thank you for spending time with us here in the darkness on the edge of town, and we look forward to having you back on to share new stories in the future.
Thank you for calling, because let me be on the program, and I hope that your audience will, quote, take it to heart and stay with you people, because this is an amazing thing that you're able to do this, and I think you're doing a wonderful thing.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
You fellows have a wonderful time.
You too. Have a great night, sir, and for next week, have a happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night, and thank you all for tuning into the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show. Again, we'll make a quick mention that there is a major television production company out there looking for families in Southern California, that are convinced that their home is haunted. They want to help you. They have a professional team of experts that can investigate your home and provide you with answers and peace of mind. So if you're a homeowner, you're afraid of your own house, or you're a family that's terrified by unexplained phenomena happening in your home, or if your children hear strange noises, feel cold drafts, experience that eerie feeling that someone or something out there is watching you, or have you had somebody die in your home, or is there a tragic history to your home or property? Do your children see or communicate with spirits inside the house? If so, you have somebody that you can contact now. Please email castingcues@yahoo.com. That's castingcues@yahoo.com, or call 310-903-5525. Again, that's 310-903-5525. And remember to tune in on the 22nd, next weekend, actually, for Father's Day weekend. We have Tiffany Johnson and Chip Coffey, who are going to talk to us about the brand new show Psychic Kids, Children of the Paranormal, which begins on the 16th on A&E. The following week, we're going to be joined by James Von Prague, live on the show. It'll be great. We hope that you'll be a part of it with us. At the end of the month, we have Wayne Herschel and more. So keep checking the website at darknessradio.com for updates on all of the guests. I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us. We do appreciate it. If there's anything guest-wise you'd like to hear, you can always email me at dave@darknessradio.com. Real quick, if anybody out there has been touched or has gotten help from our prayer requests, please contact me. We're doing a follow-up show in the month of July. We're going to talk to families that have been affected by the healing and prayer requests. You would not believe the amount of great stories we have of the healings coming in and working. So let's share your stories. You guys will come on the air with us, talk about it, and talk about what's happened for you. Again, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you back next week.